Everyone, thank you for joining today. My name is Sonia Siddiqui, and joining us today is Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
We're very excited for this webinar today. She's going to be talking about how to job search like a pro. So before I hand it over to her, I'm just going to go over a few slides. Just reminding everyone that you are all on listen only mode, so we will not be able to hear you. But please type in your questions into the Q&A tab on your screen. And for best results, please use a laptop or a desktop computer. And you will get a recording of this webinar within the next 24 hours. So if you need to log off, if you want to watch it again or share it with somebody, you will receive a recording. And I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about ACCES. We've been around for over 30 years helping job seekers such as yourselves. In the past year alone, we were able to help 34,000 job seekers. And we work with over 2,200 employee connections, and we've got a lot of sponsors and community partners. We work very closely with RBC, and Laura will be talking more about where she's tied up with RBC as well. And we've got over 30 tailored programs, 6 locations in the GTA, with our new 7th location opening up in Newmarket. And everything is online right now. So online services brings webinars to you, online virtual events, and right now everything is being hosted online. And I'll tell you more about how to access our online events after the presentation. So Laura, I'm going to hand it over to you to share your screen.
Sounds great. Sonia, I trust you'll let me know if for some reason you're not seeing my slides. Do you have them up there?
You can see your slides.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, again, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for attending today. I have had the pleasure of working with Sonia with ACCES before, so perhaps some of you have met me through these types of forums in one way or another. And it's always a pleasure to come and speak to this audience and to collaborate with ACCES. I always so enjoy both collaborating with ACCES and speaking to this audience of job seekers in particular. It's a pleasure for Prepped to do so. For those of you who don't know about Prepped and RBC Ventures, I'll give you a little information about that now. So Prepped is a free online job search support coaching tool that's available to you at fullyprepped.ca. So if you don't have an account and you'd like one, you can certainly create one and access the free tool. And Prepped is really there to support job seekers and empower them through their job search with learning exercises and helpful tools, with the ability to prepare for and practice for your interviews, as well as all sorts of great free tools and resources like resume templates, for example, free resume templates, and some guidance on how to create great resumes. We also have weekly plans that support job seekers in thoughtfully approaching their job search sort of week over week, and gives you a plan or a list of tasks to follow. And all of that is aligned to the science of job search, which I will speak about through the course of this presentation, and which I, of course, welcome questions about at the end. So that's Prepped in a nutshell. Prepped is part of RBC Ventures. So RBC, as most or many of you probably know, is Canada's largest bank. And as an organization, they're very committed to adding value to Canadians, not only in financial products and services, but more recently, within the past 2 years, with the creation of RBC Ventures in areas beyond the business of banking. And so we really have a goal of supporting Canadians in their lives in Canada, in many ways other than in banking. And so Prepped being born to support job seekers and enabling them and empowering them through their job search is really a part of that broader RBC Ventures vision of connecting with and adding value to Canadians. And I'll also speak about this through the course of my presentation. Some of you may also be familiar with another of our ventures called Arrive. Arrive is for newcomers to Canada. And they have, amongst many helpful support tools and resources for you as well, an app called Connections, which helps you network and get to know all sorts of people and start to expand your professional and social network. So I'll speak about that briefly again when I touch on networking and what it means to be networking in this day and age and during the the situation we find ourselves in with COVID. So I'll bring Arrive up again then. But again, both tools are free for you. So if you'd like to join Prepped, if you're not already a member, we would be thrilled. Again, it's fully .ca, and you'll get to know a little bit more about it as we go through the presentation today. So, job searching like a pro can be a challenging thing on any given day in any given environment. I want to stop and acknowledge that job searching in the pandemic is more challenging and requires us to perhaps focus a little more with a little more intention, be a bit more deliberate in ways that we didn't have to think about quite as much before the pandemic occurred. So, we as of today find ourselves in a situation where many of us are based from home. I'm at home right now. I'm sure many of you are as well. And we're doing this, of course, to keep each other, our communities safe. But it has changed not only our own experiences as individuals who are looking for work and our approaches, but also on the employer side, it has changed how employers are looking at the world, looking at their businesses. For many small and medium businesses, this has been a very challenging time, in particular small and medium businesses. And so it really has shifted the world around us in some very unexpected ways. And so, the goal in my presentation today is, first of all, to leave lots of time at the end for questions, but to head off some of the main questions we at Prepped have been receiving from our users in respect to everything going on around us. And one of the main questions we get is, how should I approach my job search during this pandemic? So just, people feeling quite broadly unsure of whether and how to proceed. And so, I'll offer here the advice that I've been offering all along, which is, in many ways, you should be approaching your job search in a very similar way that you had been before. And there are some very specific reasons I say this. And there's also a footnote to it, so I'll come to that as well at the end. But Prepped is based on, as I mentioned earlier, the science of job search. So when we conceived of Prepped and when we put together all of the learning exercises, all of the weekly plans for our users to follow, I'm an HR leader by trade. So before I started Prepped, I spent, many years in large enterprises, supporting HR and talent and diversity. So, as a practitioner, I do have a lot of experience, but when we built Prepped, we didn't want to base it just on our opinion or even our experience as practitioners. We wanted to make sure that if we were directing our users to follow a certain path, to focus on certain things, that it was based on something really sound and rigorous. So behind everything that you see in Prepped sits a large meta-analysis or study of studies that evaluated the job search strategies of around 10,000 people. It looked at people who took on certain strategies and who learned certain skills against those who didn't. The studies spanned North America and Europe. What's interesting and I think important for this time is that they also spanned several decades, which means that people's job search approaches were being evaluated in kind of good times and in bad from an economy perspective, and as we looked at the labor market. And appreciating there's much that today is quite dire and unpredictable perhaps in the labor market. What's reassuring is that this study evaluated people's approaches to job search in some pretty challenging times as well as good times. And so the study, being so large, containing so many people in it, was able to control for all of those things and really, with great specificity, pinpoint what are the skills you should be learning as a job seeker and what are the behaviors you should be engaging in as a job seeker that statistically predict better results for you. And so when I say that you should be primarily approaching your job search in the same way, it is because I have a strong degree of confidence that that science will continue to support and add value to job seekers today. And what's great about it is it's approachable. You can follow a plan, and these are things that you can do. So I'll give you some examples, but then also encourage you to go check out Prepped, which is, really anchored in the science. So examples include that we know people, for example, who take the time to learn job search skills. So for example, if you learn how to interview well, you do some training, that you are 3 times more likely to get a job. We know that people who build their confidence through strategies of practicing are 3 times more likely to get a job. So, these are things that you can be doing even as perhaps things have slowed down on the employer front. We know that people who rely on their friends and loved ones and community through their job search, who talk with them, tell them what they're thinking, tell them what they're up to, they are job. We know people who set goals week over week and career goals, again, all of which we facilitate at fullyprepped.ca. People who set goals are 5 times more likely to get a job. So this is more likely than people who aren't taking these strategies. So appreciating today things are a little different. These are strategies that you can invest time in right now. It's available to you virtually. You can spend time preparing your resume, preparing your interviews, practicing, building your confidence. You can take on these strategies today, even with all this going on, and they will absolutely pay you back. And so while that may happen a little more slowly or in a different manner than we might have expected because of everything going on around us, I would say big picture, you want to approach your job search in the same way I would advise you approaching your job search on any day in any labor market in any economy. I did mention there would be a footnote to this, and there is, which is, of course, you need to expect some things will be different. And so, we do need to reflect on the fact that even while, 80%, I would advise you continue on in the way you would have, there are some things, there are some expectations that need to shift given what's going on around us. So just to speak through this again, very common question from our users a little bit. The first thing I'd note is things may happen more slowly, and so you may expect that. Some employers have slowed down hiring, others have picked up. So you may expect the availability of jobs to change. And of course, people are all dealing with, being at home, working at home, including hiring managers, including HR teams, and including recruiters. And so, we all probably need a little more patience and to make sure we're bringing that empathy and understanding into our job search when we're dealing with people, because at the end of the day, that's what we all are, all dealing with the stress of this, potentially having little kids. I'm at home with them trying to work and, trying to get things done all at the same time. So, the people who are hiring right now are all dealing with this as well, all dealing with this shifting environment and the unknowns. So I think, in terms of, as you approach your job search, yes, big picture, you should be doing it the same, but also you manage your expectations. Things may be a little slower. People are going to need more empathy, all of us included. And so I think it's really important just to bear in mind that, we need to kind of take that people-centered approach to our job search today and understand, what companies are going through and what individuals are going through as we look for and apply for work. And then there are some very tactical things that will shift a little, and some of these I'll dig into more in the presentation, but things like interviews, of course, mostly moving virtually, things like networking and having to rethink how we grow and nurture our professional networks in this time, given that we can't be face-to-face. And so, I will mention that as well. There are some tactical things that might change in terms of your expectations of your job search. But again, we'll leave you with the message that big picture would encourage you to follow that very sort of deliberate, holistic plan that we lay out for you in Prepped, even as you prepare yourself for some of the things that are changing given the current environment. The last thing I want to say on this slide is, from an expectations perspective, expect that this a job search can feel perhaps challenging or difficult to people on a good day, at a time when the economy is booming and things are thriving. Looking for work is work, and it can be very challenging as a job seeker to be on that path. So know that today it may feel even more challenging and difficult, and to really focus on self-care, on taking a break if you need it, on focusing on daily habits and routines that will help keep you feeling positive and motivated, really reaching out to your networks of friends, community, loved ones, and leaning on them when you need it. Prepped has a whole set of content coming up in the latter half of May that you can check out on our blog, looking at strategies like mindfulness, giving tips to job seekers who are dealing with, slightly higher levels of stress potentially at this time. So, in terms of expectations, just, expect that, as always, looking for work is full-time work. It takes time. You have to put energy and effort in, and appreciate that, this might feel even more challenging with everything else we're all having to deal with today. So do take care of yourself, and remember to invest in that as well as your job search. So would certainly encourage all of our listeners to take very good care of themselves during this time and focus on their health and their family's health more than anything. This question we get all the time right now: what industries are still hiring? The best answer I can offer here is to reinforce, because I know you know this, that this probably changes daily, that we are all, businesses included, needing to accommodate this. And while it's very evident from the news that some industries are being hit harder economically than others, I think this is something that's changing daily. So, as I always encourage as part of an effective job search, be doing your research. Understand what's happening in the industry or industries that you're most interested in. Reflect on what's happening to their businesses, and think about how you can ensure you're reflecting that knowledge into your job search. One of the ways that I really strongly encourage our users at Prepped, and we'll ask all of you to reflect on, is, to get more proactive in your search. And that means several things. It means things like networking, reaching out to companies, even when there aren't jobs posted, to check in and see what might be available or coming soon. But it also means opening your perspective and expanding your point of view on the types of roles or industries you would consider working for. So even as I would encourage you to have a career goal, to have a plan, I always encourage our users to break their career goals down, those target roles or industries you're interested in, into sets of skills and experiences that are required and that you need to build, and to reflect on where are all the different places you could grow those same skills and experiences, to try to expand the roles that you would consider taking on, and really open up your career path to alternatives to perhaps what you might have thought before. So this isn't to suggest you should not go for your goals and achieve them, but rather, if you start to look at those goals as sets of experiences and skills you need to build, you may find looking at it that way allows you to open your mind about all the different places you can go and grab and obtain and build those skills and experiences. We know from the research that people who take a proactive approach, including those things I just talked about, sort of opening their mind and perspectives, are 6 times more likely to get a job. That is not a small lift. And so even as you evaluate the industry you're interested in, understand what's happening to it today, reflect that in how you're networking, and talking with professionals in that industry. I also encourage you to spend some time asking yourself, can I think more expansively about where I can get the skills and experiences I'm looking for in my career? Particularly if, but not only if, but particularly if the industry you've been most interested in has been impacted, and where hiring might be a little more challenging. Next question I want to talk about is, can I still network and how? So, as I just mentioned, we know that people who take proactive job search strategies, like kind of proactively reaching out, forming relationships at companies, getting connected to people who work at companies you're interested in, we know they are 6 times more likely to get a job. And networking is a really, really important part of the job search process in Canada, North America. And so, absolutely you should be looking for and applying for jobs online. I would never suggest otherwise, but I always strongly encourage a thoughtful approach to networking as part of a thorough or holistic career search. It's really, really important. Experts estimate that up to 60% of jobs that are available never even make it online because someone has networked their way in before it's ever been needed to be posted. And so growing and expanding your professional and social network is really, really important, and can add a lot of value. And so, a lot of people understandably say, well, how can I still professionally network? How can I connect with other professionals when I can't go for a coffee chat with them, and, connect professionally when I can't get mentoring advice from my mentors in person anymore? So I'll just flag that Prepped actually did a webinar completely on this topic with a networking expert named Kelly Hui. So we've posted that webinar to our blog, or it's available to users. If you sign into Prepped, you can access that webinar. So I'd encourage you, if you're interested in knowing more in depth, we've got tons of great resources for you there, and that webinar is a really, really good one. But broadly, what I'd say is your guiding principle with networking should be to build professional trust. Your goal should not necessarily be find a job. Your goal should be build a professional network that I will invest in and that will serve me well throughout the course of my career. So yes, right now I might need it to find a job, but your bigger picture perspective with your professional network is that it's a connection, a group of people with whom you have an authentic relationship, with whom you've built professional trust, who you can leverage for advice, help, and opportunity throughout your career, and to whom you can offer advice, help, and opportunity throughout your career. So when you take that perspective on networking, you can start to think about what networking might look like today. And something Kelly Hui mentions in that webinar I just discussed about virtually networking is not to underestimate the power of sending a note that doesn't require a response. So check in with people, let them know you've been thinking about them, and hope that they're doing okay. You can also, of course, request a phone call or a virtual chat. But please, as I mentioned earlier, remember that everyone is dealing with a lot right now. And so, approach those requests and the responses to them with authenticity, with gratitude where people are able to give you some time, and with, of course, understanding where they're not. But, really step back and say, what does it mean to grow and build professional trust during this time? And I think in a lot of ways, it just means showing your network that you genuinely care and writing them a note or checking in with them to see how they're doing. Sometimes without even ever expecting anything in return, just because you do want to see how they're doing. And then, of course, you can also try to leverage all the technology available to see if people have time to sit down and give you some career advice. When you do that, please make sure you've invested in preparing for those conversations. Understand what you're trying to get out of them. Understand what this person can offer you that you just can't search on Google, so that people feel their time has been leveraged effectively. We get this question a lot. Should people still be submitting their resumes, and how can mine stand out? So yes, of course, there's no reason you need to, if a job is posted, or even if it's not, as long as it's appropriately phrased, appreciate there's a lot going on right now. Your organization, is probably dealing with a lot, but wanted to share my resume. You can continue, of course, to put your resume out there. Please still do apply for jobs that are posted. Just remember to manage those expectations. Processes might take longer. Organizations are dealing with a lot as well. In terms of crafting a resume that will stand out, I think, what I'll say there is we've got all sorts of tips on Prepped. The main piece of advice I give around resumes is to ensure that you've adapted it with the job posting in mind. So absolutely it makes sense to have a core resume, a go-to resume that you start with, but you should always be honing and adapting that resume to really help it stand out relative to the job you're applying for. So there's lots of things we could talk about with resumes, but would encourage you to still keep applying for jobs and opportunities. Companies are still hiring. They are trying to use things like virtual interviews to continue to hire, and just strongly encourage you to visit fullyprep.ca to get access to all sorts of tips and advice about resumes, some beautiful free templates, and also, and most importantly, access to a holistic plan and search that doesn't only rely on online search and application and putting your resume in. I mentioned companies are still interviewing. Many have moved to virtual interviews. I've led some of these myself recently. And so again, I'll just let you know, we've got a full webinar on how to prepare for and conduct a virtual interview available again on the Prepped tool or through the Prepped blog. It's absolutely worth a rewatch. We've got a few professional recruiters there giving people tips. The main headline here is virtual interview is just an interview. Yes, it's taking place in some sort of different form, whether it be the phone or over Skype or Zoom. And so there are some particular considerations there around, making sure your technology works, around lighting that we talk about in the webinar. But again, like your job search, big picture, you want to think about and plan for your interview as you always would. You want to look and dress professionally if there's a screen, and you want to put that work and effort into practicing and preparing and building your confidence ahead of time. So virtual interviews are happening. They're happening more and more. So if you need more information or help or guidance, encourage you to check out that full webinar or specifically virtual interviews. But again, the headline I'd leave you with in answer to this question today is they're primarily like any other interview in terms of how you should be preparing yourself, with a few footnotes about how to manage the technology pieces. And so with that, I will open it up to questions. I hope I've hit on some of the most important questions that may have been on your mind. Certainly, we have, received these questions again and again from Prepped users, but wanted to make sure I left lots of time today for your questions. And so I'll stop sharing my screen now so that we can get the chat going.
Thank you, Laura. I'm going to start reading the questions out loud. And so everyone, please type your questions into the Q&A tab and we can start taking them up. And all right, so the first question here is, I'm just slowly scrolling down. Okay, so do you recommend doing cold calls if you don't hear from employers after you've applied for jobs online?
I think it is worthwhile to follow up. What I would say is always be thoughtful in how you do so. So we do recommend, for example, if there's a job you're interested in applying for, at the very least, trying to figure out who works at that company, not just to try to get your resume up to the surface to the hiring manager, which is, sometimes an appropriate thing to say, like, oh, if the hiring manager, would really appreciate you forwarding my resume along and making sure they've seen it. It depends on the contact you're asking that of and how well you know them. But it's also really valuable to connect with people who also work for that company and ask them for some help, tips, and advice about how they got their job, what the interview process was like. So again, kind of thinking of it bigger picture, not just for that specific role, but if you're really interested in that company, trying to make connection with others in it. So what I'd say is, one or two gentle follow-ups is appropriate. Of course, being professional and understanding if you don't hear back or if they've gone another direction. But I do think it's worthwhile. And ultimately, I'd say do use your judgment. And if for some reason you think that might not be the right step, obviously listen to your judgment. But as a broad general rule, I do think it's appropriate if appropriately done. It's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And with everything going on right now, people are a bit desperate to get any job. So do you think it's okay to negotiate salary and perks and benefits right now?
Yeah, so
You should just
this
be
is,
thankful that you're getting a job during this time.
yeah. Yeah, so I do think it's important to know your worth, and to know that in a very thoughtful and researched way. So I always encourage our users. Incidentally, we have a blog exactly on this topic if you're interested in learning more. But we always encourage our users to do their market research. What I would say is so that you know what's happening in market and what is an appropriate or expected salary range for the role you're looking at. What I would say to users is if you are going to go back and negotiate for a higher salary, you know, in my personal experience, I've never seen that sort of make an employer rescind an offer if thoughtfully done. So what I'd say is don't go back and just say, well, I've done my research and here's what it pays in the market. Explain why you as a candidate feel that your experience and what you bring to the table is worthy of the salary you're negotiating for, and just be thoughtful. And if you're super far off, you know, it may be something where you need to either recalibrate your expectations. So, you know, I do think it's important also to be thoughtful in what you're negotiating for. You obviously don't want to be in complete ballparks, but I do think it's okay to sort of professionally go back, explain why you'd ask them to reconsider the amount. And to your point, Sonia, remember also that there are lots of other things that can be negotiated. So salary is only one thing. Vacation, benefits, these are other things that we can look to. I often give the advice where if someone goes and asks for more salary and the employer comes back and says, sorry, we just can't budge, to say, would you consider a 6-month review? Because usually, you know, you have to wait a whole year before your performance is evaluated and your salary is assessed, to say, okay, fair enough, but you know, would it be possible to have a 6-month review where we could evaluate it again, so you're not waiting that full year? So there are lots of things you can negotiate with. So again, I think, you know, you just want to know your worth, understand what it is relative to the market, and then when you do negotiate, to do so in a professional way where you show yourself to have been thoughtful and to make the case why. And then ultimately, when they come back with it, of course, you'll have to make the decision about whether or not that makes sense for you. So hope that answered the question. And again, we've got a great blog about it as well, if that helps.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And can you just go through the process of how to create an account on Prepped? And is it for everyone, whether they're in Canada or outside of Canada? Can you shed some clarity on that?
Absolutely. So yes, it's available. It's available anywhere. It's free everywhere. So to create an account, you go to fullyprepped.ca, and it's pretty evident to say get started. You would create a username and password, verify your account, and then you're sort of off and running. And yes, I think anyone anywhere can benefit from it. A lot of what's available to you in Prepped is the opportunity to learn and practice. So we have a tremendous amount of learning exercises focused on things like career planning, articulating your skills, focused on preparing for practicing for interviews, on networking. We have an elevator pitch generator that helps you create a statement where you articulate who you are, what you're after, that you can sort of deliver in a networking setting or at the top of an interview. So I think there's tools there that benefit absolutely anyone and everyone. What I just flag or remind users is that the science that underpins Prepped reflects strategies that were successful in North American, European job search markets. So that's not to suggest that the strategies, the recommendations, the advice isn't valuable elsewhere, but I just would sort of flag that is what the content is based on. But particularly for anyone planning to move to North America as well, it's very helpful to prepare you in advance for what the job search looks like. So I hope that answered the question. So fullyprepped.ca, get started, and you'll be asked to create a username and password, and then you can set up your free account.
Thank you. And what do you suggest for immigrants that haven't landed yet? Should they start applying for jobs before they land, or should they start their job search once they've landed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly, Sonia, please, by all means, weigh in yourself as well. I know there's great, advice coming from ACCES, who specializes in this area. My view is you can never start researching and connecting too soon. And so, one of the things that we always encourage our users to do is to create a list of target companies, to read about, learn about, research those companies, try to start getting connected. And so, in as much as getting connected includes applying, I think you probably can. I think, though, I'd always encourage users and job seekers to take it one step more holistic, to say, it's not just about applying, it's about starting to build and grow your networks. And the earlier you do that, you start to understand the companies, the landscape, what's going on in those industries, and start to form perspectives on employers in the country where you're moving. I think that that's also an important place to spend time. Sonia, anything you would add from the perspective of ACCES to that particular question?
So we actually have a program for pre-arrival clients. So before they arrive, we do start connecting. We start helping them with their job search, and once they're ready, we start connecting them to employers. So it's not like employers are not open to the idea, but I think that they do have to be honest on their resume. So things like putting your city as Toronto where you're not even here, that turns employers off. But I know that clients working through us, because we already have great relationships built with employers. So let's say if they're looking to hire 3 months down the road, they know that they can reach out to us, and we'll have some people ready to go who are job ready in Canada. So
Fantastic.
That's what I'd like to add. And so I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn. There's a few questions, and I'm going to try to make steps for them. So first of all, how do you even build a professional trust or relationship with someone that you've never met before? It's all online.
That's a great question. So I love this concept of professional trust, and it's not mine. There's actually been research done on this, and so when we talk about it in prep, we footnote that research. What researchers have found is that professional trust builds in very specific ways, and it's the combination of how credible someone sees you to be, how sort of empathetic or trustworthy they think you are. And so we talk a lot about that in terms of active listening, being really present, showing people you really are invested in them and care about them. How credible you are, and how reliable you are is another factor. So, if you say you're going to do something, do you follow through? So credibility, empathy, and reliability. Those three factors in the research are then undermined by the degree to which people perceive you to be self-oriented. So in other words, if you're the kind of person where it seems to be all about you, and we've probably all bumped into those professionals where we don't hear from them for years, and then all of a sudden they need something from us. If people perceive you to be completely self-oriented, it does undermine their sense of professional trust. When I talk about professional trust in the context of job seeking, what I really like about it is I believe it to be very, very easy to establish this both quickly and certainly virtually. So think about those three factors. Credibility. Credibility when it comes to job search is certainly about your expertise. So if you're engaging with someone or interacting with them and you do have expertise to bring to bear in a sort of humble and relevant way, by all means do. But what I stress when it comes to job search is credibility is found in the questions you asked. So if you're engaging with someone online, or even asking questions about a post that they've made, make sure it's not something you could just look up on Google. Show thoughtfulness and research in the questions you ask. That builds credibility. And so if you're doing a coffee chat, if you're having a phone call, or even, as I said, if you're just engaging with someone online, like, hey, great post, and you want to engage or ask a question, make sure you're doing so in a way that builds your credibility by being thoughtful in the questions you're asking. In terms of active listening or building, empathy, again, today, that might look like simply sending notes to people to say, hey, I've just wanted to let you know you're on my mind. Hope you're doing okay with all this going on. I've been thinking of you. So you can sort of build that sense of authentic relationship by showing yourself to be someone who cares about people, not they can give to you. And so you can do that, you know, by right now sort of reaching out, keeping in touch, asking how people are doing. You can do that by offering to help them. If you think there's something of value, you can offer them. And you can do it by, when they are giving of their time, really genuinely actively listening to what they have to say. So not, you know, getting busy trying to think of your next question, but really, really listening to their advice and help. And the last one, reliability. You can demonstrate this virtually by being on time. If you do set up a meeting, by sending thank you notes, by following through on things if you have committed to doing them. And even I always like this idea of like looping back and keeping in touch. So, hey, thanks again for that chat a month ago. I wanted to let you know that I actually implemented this advice you gave, and here's what resulted. Thanks again. Or it was valuable. I actually shared it also with a colleague who's also been getting, you know, a lot of benefit from that. So just wanted to say thanks again. So really show that you come prepared, that you're on time, you're sending thank you notes, you're confirming the time of the meeting ahead of time. All of these things can be done virtually and through virtual interactions. And then the last piece I'd say around avoiding a sense of self-orientation. I mean, if you're operating in that manner, that goes a lot of setting a tone of, you know, I care more than just about what you can give me. I know this can be a little more challenging, or it might seem more challenging when you are looking for work because you are asking for help. But self-orientation doesn't mean you can't ask for help. I think what it means is you need to be very grateful for people's time. When you are asking for help, being specific about what you need and what you think someone can offer you, and being realistic about that, and showing genuine gratitude, and when possible, offering to pay that forward or pay that back, you know, and offer them help as well. So again, building professional trust is those three factors: your credibility, your reliability, the sense to which you're seen as empathetic or trustworthy, sort of, you know, negatively underscored or taken away if you seem really self-oriented. Those are all things that you can implement in a virtual networking moment. Even when you're reaching out and touching base on LinkedIn, you can show yourself to be credible and reliable in those interactions. So, I don't want to be naive and pretend that it's just as easy, or that networking is as easy as it would be if you could pick up and meet people in person. I appreciate we're in a very sort of different situation here, but I think what's worth focusing on is there's a lot you can accomplish through networking, even virtually, by keeping those principles in mind. So we actually have a worksheet on building professional trust on Prepped once you're in the tool, in our resources section, if you ever want to learn more about it. So I hope that helped and answered the question, and certainly standing by if there's any follow-up.
Thank you. And so again, this is a little bit more about LinkedIn. And how do you get someone to, or who should you ask for a recommendation on LinkedIn? And if you do, how do you ask them?
Yeah, so I think I'd want to bring this one down to the objective of what you're trying to do. So obviously, like, I think it's great to get a recommendation so that you can show in your profile, you know, that you've got people willing to stand behind you. The objective or reason you want to do that is because you want to showcase or share with employers that you have a certain skill set, that perhaps you're a good colleague to work with. So I'd reflect on what it is you're trying to reflect to employers. What is that brand you're trying to portray? Who best can authentically and truthfully speak to that brand, that skill, those qualities, and so that way, when you approach that person and ask them if they'd be willing, they themselves can truthfully and authentically sort of stand behind the things that they're hoping that you're asking them to represent about you. In terms of asking them, I'd say just important you write it in a professional note. Again, show empathy, especially for the time we're in. I expect you're really busy, appreciate if you have some time for this. If I were doing it, I might also consider giving them a few sort of headlines or thoughts or bullet points about, it would be, really helpful. I'm looking to showcase that I've experienced in this skill and that I'm a collaborative colleague. if given our work together on X project, if you feel these are things you could stand behind, would really appreciate a recommendation for you on LinkedIn suggesting these things. So I would say make sure you've been thoughtful about why you're asking that person. Make sure that they would understand, based on the context in your past, your history, your interactions together, that it would be evident to them why you're asking them to be your referral in that way. Show empathy for the fact that we're in this situation. They may not have time, acknowledge that it's very busy for lots of people and that you appreciate any time they can offer. And again, if they politely decline or don't go back, I would suggest you could follow up maybe once and just say, oh, again, appreciating how busy it is, just wanted to check in. But do have empathy and understanding if for one reason or another, it's not something they can do for you. So again, I hope that helps. And but certainly I think it's appropriate, if you've been thoughtful, to reach out and ask for that kind of referral or recommendation.
Thanks, Laura. And could you tell us a few job searching platforms that people can use if they're new to Canada and they're not really familiar with what to use, what platforms to use?
Yep. So if the question is about job boards, I think some of the more common ones include things like LinkedIn, like Indeed, and even Google now. Like there's Google Jobs, so you can access a lot of jobs there. So if that didn't answer this individual's question, or if that's not what they meant when they were talking about platforms, I would encourage them to follow up in the chat or perhaps follow up. But those I think are often common ones. I imagine, of course, at ACCES you have connections into employers. I think what I would stress is, again, looking for and applying for jobs online is part of any modern job search. It's of course part of what you will be doing. However, many organizations have on average 250 applicants to every one posting. So, there's a lot of volume. LinkedIn, for example, there's 100 million applications submitted a month on LinkedIn. So just to give you context of, there is a lot of noise and a lot of volume when it comes to people applying for jobs online. When employers use ATS, applicant tracking systems, most resumes are scanned by a technology, by a robot, and most are kicked back or rejected in less than 11 seconds, 80%. So this is not said to discourage you. I really do encourage you to look for and apply for jobs online. It should reinforce why it's important you adapt your resume to the job description, because it will be scanning for those skill keywords. So make sure you've updated your resume. It has to be truthful, of course, to your skills and experience, but the degree to which you can reflect those that are being asked in the job description, please do so. And please do engage in a holistic job search. Prep sets you up well for that. That includes other things like practicing for confidence, keeping your friends and loved ones connected, being proactive in your search strategies. I would not advise relying solely on online search and application in a job search today. So I know I did more than answer your question, but I can't help myself when we start talking about job boards and job platforms of that nature. Really do encourage you to complement your look for work online with some of these other strategies we've discussed.
Thank you. And do you think that applying for jobs during this time will help? Will employers actually call right now for an interview, or do you think all employers are waiting for things to go back to normal?
Yeah, I think my answer to this one is, so first of all, appreciate the question, appreciate why you're asking it. And it shows, sort of a sense that, yes, things are different for employers. And so, of course, that's true that employers are trying to figure this out. Some may have frozen certain job postings, but others may be hiring actively. And this kind of goes back to, you can't score a goal if you don't shoot the ball. And so I would encourage you to still submit applications, to still apply for jobs. Just again, manage those expectations to understand that things might take longer, the process might be different, you may be needing to do virtual interviews. But as jobs are posted and are said to be available, absolutely you can continue to apply for those jobs. Again, complementing that job application strategy with strategies of networking, building your skills so that if and when you do get that interview, you're very well prepared, or you've already networked with 3 people in the company and have some really thoughtful questions to ask and know what to expect of that company and its culture. So yes, keep applying. Employers may take longer, may take opportunities off the table during this time. So yes, we need to expect that it is different. But if the jobs are there and they're posted, I do think it's worthwhile putting in an application if it's a job you're really interested in. Anything you would add, Sonia, from your perspective?
No, I think you answered that very well. Thank you. And another good question here, we've gotten this often. Do you think it's okay to ask to work for free so that you can get the job just because you really want to get a job or get into a company? Is that a good idea?
Yeah, so I personally would advise against that. I think most organizations no longer do unpaid internships. And, organizations, good companies value talent and appreciate that people need to, make a living and earn a living. So that, of course, different from volunteering. You absolutely can grow and build your skills and network through volunteering for causes where that's relevant, meaningful, nonprofits, charities. So certainly, as you have time and are able to give back to a cause, to a charity, to meet all sorts of people, to grow and showcase your skills, this can be a very powerful way to grow your resume. When it comes to a private enterprise, wouldn't suggest this is an approach that makes a lot of sense or that they'd even be amenable to. So Sonia, not sure if there's anything you would add from your experience with ACCES, but from my view, not necessarily an approach I would advise that the listeners.
I 100% agree with you because your skills, your experience, everything is very valuable and you need to be confident of that fact as well. So the fact that you are just going to offer free services, it doesn't make sense. So if you're confident in who you are and what services you can provide, what experience and skills you can bring to a company, you should be compensated for it. So yes, I agree with you. And do you have any advice for job seekers who want to change their careers or change their fields? What could they take with them into the new sector or whatever they're going into?
Yeah. So this is a great and powerful question. So top line advice would be to really start to understand jobs in terms of collections of skills, experience, and expertise. So for whatever the new role or industry is that you're interested in, really start to break down the nuts and bolts of that role. What does it require you to do? How do you go about doing it? And what expertise would be required in order to do it? And so we have some long and short-term career planning guides and prepped that sort of ask you these questions. The reason I ask you to do this is when you start to look at a job in terms of a bundle of, expertise you might need, of experiences you need to have under your belt, of skills that you need, you can start to do a bit of a mapping to say, well, what do I already have? What has my career to date already offered me in terms of how I operate? So those soft skills like leadership, innovation, in terms of what I can execute on, those hard skills. You can evaluate if there is expertise that you perhaps need to showcase or somehow obtain. And that way you can start to see and articulate yourself as a professional in a way that's very relevant for the roles you're looking for. You can step back and evaluate your resume from that lens as well. So you can start to adapt it, start to showcase skills and experience that are relevant to the job you're looking for. And then, I'll say it and say it again and again, probably is please do research the companies in that new field. See if you can get connected to people with the goal of learning, understanding what's going on in that industry, getting to know as many people as you can, asking them for advice about, sharing with them what your background is, what your skills are, the work that you've done so far to try to articulate those skills in a relevant way and see if they have any advice or insight for that. So I think, top line, that would be my recommendation for anyone looking for a career change.
Thank you, Laura. So we're going to do one last question here. And good question. I think it'll answer a lot of questions. What's the best thing to ask an interviewer once they say, "Do you have any questions for us?" A lot of people, they're just struck. They don't know what to ask. So it's probably great for them to plan these questions ahead. But what are the type of questions they can ask?
Yeah, so we have a great resource on questions you can ask an employer. I'd start with, what do you want to know? So, and I really mean that. If you just step back and being a job seeker is interesting because obviously we have an end goal. There's something we need. We need a job. We're looking for a job, but we want to make sure it's a good fit. And so I would start, stepping back and saying, well, what do you really want to know or understand about the job? And things you could start to think about are nothing that I could Google. So again, if you can look it up on Google, don't waste anyone's time asking that in an interview. And you can start to break down your questions in terms of questions you might have about the company, questions you might have about the leader and the team or the leadership, and questions you have about the job itself. And again, this is a moment where you can build credibility by asking thoughtful questions. I've noticed such and such a thing is happening in this industry today and read in your company's newsroom that you're responding in this way. I'm very curious about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So again, really take some time to prepare questions in advance that show thoughtfulness to the fact that you've researched the company, their leadership team, and the role. You can also ask questions about, how does your team work together? So you can ask questions about what the experience will be like. But what I'd say is ultimately make sure these are things you really want to know. So ask them authentically, and then build your credibility by asking those authentic questions in a thoughtful and well-researched way. Every interviewee should go into the interview with a few questions prepared that they'd like to ask. And you can even, pull out your notes at the end. If they say, wait, do you have any questions? You can make reference like, oh, actually, I had meant to ask about this, but when we talked about blah, 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 this was answered. So I think actually I'd like to ask this instead. So really just go in prepared with questions that are credible, that are thoughtful, and that you really want the answer to.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was great information, awesome webinar. Again, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insight. Would you like to say anything before I move on?
Just to everyone, please, good luck with your job search, and please stay well and take very good care of yourselves in this very extraordinary time. And thank you, ACCESS, again for hosting me.
Thank you so much, Laura.